Sourdough challahs have me enamored. Not because they're $18 for a loaf of bread, and not because of their rather odd, sweet and sour flavor, or Klal Yisrael's obsession with it, but because there isn't any yeast in the sourdough challah. But yet it still gets all puffed up. There isn't any raising agent. It just naturally ferments and puffs up to that famous-looking sourdough challah shape. But it bothered me. What does that mean? It puffs up without any yeast? How could that be? Then what's the point of yeast? And how does the sourdough challah become so puffed up? And what I discovered is that the way that you make sourdough challah is by creating this thing called starter, which is just mixing some water and some flour together and letting it sit and letting it ferment and then scooping out the goop and then coming back and putting in more flour and water and waiting a little bit more. And eventually, the most amazing thing happens. Without yeast, over time, the sourdough challah rises without any yeast. Why? Because according to science, there is natural yeast and bacteria in the air that mixes in to the dough and then actually helps the dough to begin rising. Ladies and gentlemen, you hear this? There's yeast in the air. And surely you're aware that the Se'or Shebe'isa, the yeast, Chazal tell us, that's the Yetzirah. Surely you're aware that the reason that we have matzah that's flat on the holiday of Pesach and not puffed up challah is because we're trying to remind ourselves about the evils that are prevalent in yeast. So we want to have a flattened matzah. But here we learn through sourdough challahs that there's natural yeast, there's natural Yetzirah in the air. It reminds us of the Gemara in Sukkah, Hatzafuni, Ze Yetzirah, the hidden one is the Yetzirah. He's everywhere. He's waiting in ambush, but you cannot see him and you do not know his agendas. For us, it seems like we're going to become haughty, sour, sweet, kind of puffed up sourdough sinners if we don't stay on the watch, on the lookout to do our best, to sur meirah, to protect against the bacteria and yeast-filled atmosphere. We should install in our hearts to be on a lookout, to do our best, to have our machama, our war against the Yetzirah, to not ever get too haughty, to not get too caught up in ourselves, our self-centeredness, because to Evas Hashem, Kol Geva Lev, it is literally disgusting in Hashem's eyes. Anyone who is haughty and puffed up, whether it be a sourdough or a whole wheat roll. Be on the lookout to stay humble and to see the Yetzirah's advances, because he lurks in the atmosphere with his yeast particles that fill up the air.